Have you ever given your time, energy, and love to your family only to feel invisible and unappreciated? Have you ever helped someone in need, sacrificed your own comfort, and then been pushed aside when they no longer needed you, or worse, when it became inconvenient for them? In today's story, you'll see the journey of a grandmother who devoted herself to her family after the loss of her loved one, only to find herself unrecognized, unthanked, and eventually treated like a burden. By watching this story, you'll understand the signs of being taken for granted, how invisible sacrifices can quietly pile up, and how you can take back your dignity and self-respect without burning bridges. You'll learn how to set boundaries, how to protect your contributions, and how to recognize when love is being exploited. Have you ever experienced something like this where your generosity was ignored or taken for granted? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your story. And as you listen to this grandmother's journey, think about what you would do if you were in her shoes and how you could prepare yourself if this ever happened to you. I promised myself that I would just stay for a few months after Eli's death, just long enough to assist Taryn in establishing herself. She was balancing a spouse with erratic work hours and grieving toddler twins. I had the instinct, the time, and the energy. I moved in as a result. 3 years have passed since then. Being needed felt fantastic at first. I got up early, made school lunches, and switched up the laundry loads. I took my pension and tucked it away somewhere. Their earnings were insufficient to cover childcare deposits, groceries, and energy. I made my payment without any problems. I reminded myself that's what family does. But the thank yous became less frequent as the months went by. The space I occupied, both physically and emotionally, shrank as the favors turned into demands. Taran ceased asking if I could eat supper with them, even though the second grandmother, Betty Niles, resided across town and was rarely there. The twins began phoning her. I would occasionally bring up Eli, but I would always get a blank stare, as though he were a television program that no one was interested in longer. I stayed, nevertheless. I ignored the sidelong glances when I watched my crime series too loudly and cooked the meals according to the thermostat, which was locked at 68. I reminded myself that being near my grandchildren was a blessing and that this was what old age looked like, useful, if not treasured. Then, last Tuesday night, Taryn entered the laundry room with her phone shielded in her hand as I was folding the boys' socks. "Mom," she murmured, avoiding eye contact. "The parents of Niles will be relocating." With a sock still in my hand, I blinked. "They are here on a visit." "No, relocating permanently. We require the room." I laughed and waited for the smile to appear. It didn't. "By the end of the month, you'll have to depart," she added. I laughed aloud at that moment. I was unable to resist. It sounded ridiculous, like a line from a lousy sitcom. But she crossed her arms and her face remained flat. She meant it. Slowly, as though movement could cause reality to slip away, I put the socks in the basket. Then, quietly and calmly, I got up and passed her. I saw my frame, my print, and our family portrait on the shelf in the hallway. However, I was no longer involved. The door to the office was already open. Inside were stacked boxes. The shift started early the following morning. Taran gently knocked on my door as if I were a visitor using the place. With a Sharpie in her hand and a false smile on her face, she entered. "Could you please begin packing up some of your non-essential items, merely to begin preparing space for the in-laws? I thought you may temporarily store some of your belongings in the office closet." Not necessary. I surveyed the space. The bookcase, the quilt on the bed, and even the lamp on the dresser were all mine. However, I answered, "Sure," and nodded. She peeked into the kitchen later that afternoon while I was preparing dinner. Quick thing too, Bet has numerous allergies. Her sinuses can be irritated by strong odors. Reduce the amount of curry and garlic for a time. Slowly, I stirred the pot. Naturally, I heard them conversing in the living room that evening while I was hauling towels to the laundry room. I stopped at the hallway's edge, where the partial wall concealed me. As Taran said, "We'll place a wager on the master. The guest room downstairs is Dorian's." "How about Mom?" Niles inquired. After a pause, she spoke in a casual, clipped tone. "She is able to travel anywhere. Perhaps we could convert a room for the kids while the boys share a bed." Niles remained silent. I forgot the towels and slipped back to my room. I felt as if I had inhaled something sharp since my chest was constricted. Over the next few days, my perspective on the house changed. The groceries were no longer being changed. I enjoyed the coffee, but there was more pre-made food and less fruit. No one offered me a blanket, and the thermostat was set to a freezing 66 degrees. The seating changed on its own at dinner. As though waiting for her, Bet's chair was already set up next to the lads. Mine remained undisturbed, nestled behind the table's corner. I was no longer asked to tell the boys stories before bed. They were growing too old for that, Taryn observed. I started eating on a tray and viewing old home movies on low volume in my room by myself in the evenings. I developed the practice of silently and barefootly strolling about the home late at night. Only then did it feel like mine. I would fold a stray blanket, check the locks, and turn on the porch light. Little habits from a life I was still living, but was no longer invited to, like muscle memory. I began to pay attention to the inventory at that point. Not just what I had, but also what I was not allowed to use anymore. With a furrowed brow, Camille regarded me from the other side of the table while she carefully stirred her tea. Every first Thursday, we got together at Finch's Cafe, but this time was different. Since sitting down, I hadn't spoken much. Finally, she put down her spoon and remarked, "They're not easing you out. You've already been wiped." I laughed softly, more in my breath than in my voice. Even though I know I said it, it sounds different when you speak it aloud. When I got home, I turned on my laptop and went to my bank account. I didn't do that very often. I've never been one to quantify love in monetary terms. However, Camille's comments stuck to me like steam for some reason. Month by month, I reviewed the statements, utility auto-pays, grocery runs, and checks sent straight to Taryn for extras. I began working on a spreadsheet. By the time I was done, it had topped $26,000. The number throbbed in my head as I reclined in my chair. From a fixed income, $26,000, quiet earnings that enabled their family to operate without recognition or gratitude. I took an old manila folder out of a drawer. It included the documents I had gathered years prior when, following Eli's death, I was considering purchasing a modest condo. I had prepared a deposit. Days before I signed, Taryn called in tears. Overnight, the twins' childcare expenses had doubled. Niles was in between jobs. The following day, I sent her the deposit via wire transfer. On the phone, she had sobbed and offered to reimburse me. It was almost 3 years ago. The folder was soft from handling, so I closed it and cradled it in my lap. My hands remained steady. Not quite yet. However, something changed within me. Space was no longer the focus of this. It had nothing to do with food planning, bees' allergies, or extra rooms. Being helpful until I was no longer needed, until I became inconvenient, was the goal. I placed the folder on the counter in the kitchen and gazed at it for a while. Then I took a pen out of the drawer once more and wrote a silent message on a sticky pad. Locate the documents, put it in writing, keep track of everything. Like a promise or a warning, the page remained there. Before I asked her, I waited until the boys were out on their bikes. In the kitchen, Taryn was stirring a pot of dull, store-bought food. With my hands folded in front of me as if I needed to schedule an appointment, I stood just outside the counter. "Where do you think I'll go?" She didn't raise her head. "Mom, I'm not sure you're intelligent. It will come to you." I blinked, allowing our stillness to grow. "That made it less cruel," she remarked, "because Niles' parents really need the stability right now. They're growing older. His father has back problems, and his mother has prediabetes. They require attention." As though I hadn't been the one getting up early to shovel the snow, taking the boys to doctor's appointments, and preparing homemade meals, I almost burst out laughing, as though I hadn't maintained this place while she and Niles were struggling to keep it together. She turned to me at last and remarked, "You've had a good run here." The time has come. The time has come. As if I were on a long vacation for which I should be thankful, as if I hadn't sacrificed my life for theirs. Slowly, I nodded. Correct. Without saying another word, I entered the living room and saw it. Eli's arm was around my shoulder, and the boys were covered in popsicle juice in the family portrait from the summer we all visited Lake Geneva that used to hang above the mantel. It was replaced by a framed picture of Niles as a kid standing next to an unfamiliar boy. The frame was brand new, shiny, gold-edged, and noticeable. For longer than I intended to, I stood there and stared at it. Taryn had already gone upstairs when I turned back. I took my tea into the garage and sat on the cool step next to the dryer that night, while the rest of the house was humming with conversations about arrival dates and allergen-free mattress covers. I drew 2 lines in the little journal I'd kept since Eli's death. This isn't their home yet, but it's also not mine anymore. I put the book away and put it back in the pocket of my sweater. I then began creating a mental list after opening the cabinet above the washing machine. I began by taking care of the dryer and washer. Midweek during flu season, the old set broke, so I got new ones. Taryn was in a panic. Niles wasn't in the city. The following morning, I went to the appliance store and made my entire payment. I still had the 2-year-old receipt in my email. After printing it off, I put it in a fresh folder that I had marked personal assets in pencil. The dining table came next. I recalled comparing wood treatments, measuring the area with Camille, and ensuring there were enough leaf extensions for Thanksgiving. Every birthday dinner since Eli passed, every school assignment, and every cereal bowl spill had taken place at the table. I had made a check payment. I still had the carbon copy in my desk drawer. When Taryn complained about the boys' nighttime coughing during allergy season, the air purifier arrived. Since no one else had thought to get me one that year, I got the Instant Pot as a Christmas present. I moved slowly through the home, my gaze lingering on things I had long since given up on. The small rug in the entryway that I purchased after slipping on the tile once, the shelf in the hallway where I stored extra batteries and extension cords, and the standing lamp in the living room's corner. Each item had a backstory, a silent, imperceptible history of use. I started creating a list after opening a new document on my laptop. In addition to what I had bought, I also knew when, how much, and why. I double-checked PayPal receipts, store accounts, and credit card statements. The narrative was clear and the numbers were consistent. I collected 3 folders worth of printed records and receipts by the time the boys were in bed and the hallway lights had gone down. I hid them deep in the corner beneath my mattress and gazed at the ceiling for a long time. I started a private browser window just before midnight and reserved a weekend stay at a short-term rental that was 15 minutes away. I convinced myself it was only a test, so I used a different last name, nothing more than a trial run. I held off until Friday. Niles was supposed to take the twins to their karate class and then stop by his parents' place while Taryn was on a work retreat. That allowed me 4 hours to clean my window. If I followed the plan, it would be long enough. I texted Camille that I was ready and parked the rented van down the block. 10 minutes later, she showed there with a hard expression on her face and her sleeves rolled up. We made slow, deliberate progress, just zipped duffels and measured steps. No dragging chairs or banging cabinets. We began by going through my winter clothes, linens, sewing machine, and old humidifier in the master closet. The living room followed. The rug I had purchased after almost slipping on the slippery tile was rolled up. The books were packed away by Camille. When she discovered the one with Eli's handwriting in the margins, she hesitated and handed it to me silently. It took the longest in the kitchen. Over the years, I refilled every tiny gadget, every pan, and every utensil I had bought. With the exception of a cracked colander and a few mismatched mugs, the shelves were left bare but clean. Even the Instant Pot in particular was taken by me. Last on our list was the dining table. Before I disassembled the leaf extensions and covered the seats with old blankets, I gave it one more clean down. As we worked, Camille shook her head. They will enter and believe that the home has collapsed. No, I replied. When they took me out, the van was full by noon and they were going to come in and see what they had constructed. I took one last look around the house to make sure everything I had touched was there, not to reminisce. I then took a seat at the kitchen counter and put a single sheet of paper in a visible location for them to view. The previous evening, I had typed it, printed it out at the library, and signed it in blue ink. I got what I paid for. You can keep what you tossed away. No signature, no love, just the facts. I drove the vehicle with Camille to the new rental, a small apartment that was equipped but had a broken heater and chipped worktops. The lock, however, clicked beneath my key. I touched the thermostat and it replied. I was the one who was silent. I prepared a new list of things I wouldn't miss that night and brewed tea in my own mug in a kitchen that didn't hate me. Jonah, the slender locksmith who arrived early, had a slight coffee and metal odor. When I gave him a bottle of water, he graciously shook his head and went right to work. The deadbolt was changed in less than 20 minutes. I kept the fresh set of keys in my palm for longer than necessary when he handed them to me. They were genuine and warm. In the same day, I signed the lease. No complication, no secret language, just a single page. Just a rent payment that I could make each month without using any of my pension funds. Tehran was unaware of a savings account that I had set up autopay from. I had begun it immediately following Eli's passing, making little contributions here and there. I had no idea what I was saving for at the time. I did now. I was unpacking dishes in my kitchenette that night when someone knocked on the door. I paused, still expecting criticism or demands that weren't mine. However, a woman with a tin of cookies and a pleasant grin was standing there when I opened it. She said it was Leota. I noticed you moving into Unit 3B. Every Thursday, we gather in the rec room to play cards. You ought to attend. Astonished at how fast the yes escaped my lips, I nodded. An hour later, Leota, 3 other widows, 1 divorced, and I were all retired and seated at a folding table, laughing over strong decaf coffee in awful hands. I wasn't asked to tidy up. No one interrupted me. No one anticipated anything other than my appearance. I felt as though a knot had been untied in my chest as I made my way back to my flat. I sat cross-legged on the futon, cooked scrambled eggs on my tiny electric burner, and ate under the soft light of a lamp I had selected for myself. Somewhere in my head, the old house was still resonating, but it was no longer as strong. The windows were cracked, the door was locked, and the keys were under my pillow while I slept. It was habit. A habit I was now ready to break, not fear. At 9:13 a.m., the first call was placed. I allowed it to ring. I was aware of the tight, irritated tone. There was no voicemail left by her. 20 minutes later, there was a second call. She left a message this time. "Hello, Mother. I was just curious if you might have taken more than you required. There is nothing in the refrigerator. Did you also intend to take all the pots?" She had made 5 calls by midday. At 1:04 p.m., the 6th occurred, with a voicemail that was tight at first but soon fell apart. "The stove isn't working and the twins are sobbing because they can't find their cereal. It's not the same, despite Niles' efforts to fix it. The Instant Pot is missing. Really, did you steal the washer?" I had indeed. Voicemail number 8 arrived while I was seated at my small fold-out table sipping tea from a cup I didn't have to share. "Come on, Mom, that's a lot. We were surprised that everything was gone. At the very least, could you bring some of the children's stuff?" Who, indeed, steals the air purifier? I assumed it was someone who purchased it. Her voice lost its harshness by the 10th call and took on a different tone. "Look, I may have said things incorrectly. I was under stress. Even Niles' parents aren't offering any assistance yet. They've only made things more chaotic. I didn't intend to make you feel unwelcome. It had nothing to do with my feelings. It concerned what I had at last come to terms with." It was after dark when call 11 arrived. She sounded worn out. "Hoarse. Please, Mom, I didn't intend for it to sound that way." "Return. The boys ask you where you are all the time. I didn't think you were going to go." On the 12th call, I turned off the ringer and watched the phone screen go black. I stood at my window later that evening, silent and unconcerned by the chaos in that house across town, gazing down at the street below. Till I was missed. I was no longer needed. There is a distinction. I cleaned my teacup, patted it dry with a towel I had purchased, and put it back on the shelf I had hand-drilled into the wall. Located downtown, sandwiched between a flower store and a dry cleaner, the lawyer's office was peaceful. Soft-spoken yet straightforward, Miss Howren went over my notes and invoices without passing judgment. She looked through the folder and nodded. On a whim, I had brought a worn grocery ledger, bank statements, and appliance invoices. "A lot of evidence, but no formal lease," she said. "You would have legal rights since you would be seen as a contributing tenant. We can prepare a claim if you would like reimbursement, or you can simply go. You can choose that." I knew already, but I nodded. Their money wasn't what I wanted. The dignity they had taken for granted was what I desired. I composed the letter that evening. I didn't thought it out too much. I wasn't only residing there, Taryn. I was putting money, time, and care into it. When it was convenient for you, you treated me like a tenant. When it wasn't, you treated me like a burden. I was hurt, But I didn't leave. After remembering who I am, I departed. In addition to losing a cook, a babysitter, and a housekeeper, you have also lost your mother. That expense will appear in your home, but not in your bank app. The following morning, Maris, I carefully folded it, put it in an envelope, and left it at the post office. No address for return. Leota had left a pie and a note that said, "See you Thursday on my porch. By the time I returned, be sassy." Grinning, I opened the door and took a step back into my personal area. Camille arrived carrying a supermarket bag full of cheese and crackers, 2 plastic glasses, and a bottle of boxed wine. She gave me a nod of approval after surveying my tiny studio. "It's comfortable," she remarked, removing her shoes. "It smells as if no one has been shouting inside. Like college ladies, we sat on the futon and laughed till we wheezed. No clock monitoring for the first time in years. There were only 2 women who had known each other long enough to laugh uncontrollably, with no one in need of anything, no corrections regarding the thermostat or my towel folding technique. Leota knocked on my home the following day with a pot holder that was hand-stitched and included purple flowers with gold accent. "Present for the house," she said. Returned when my hands were more steady. I hung it on the oven handle after thanking her. In that moment, it felt earned and unexpected. A large envelope showed up in the mail a few days later. A crayon drawing was attached to a thin paper plate within. It displayed stick figures of BME and 2 young boys in front of a modest house with a crooked chimney. The words, "Grandma's house," were written at the top in irregular, cautious characters. I held it on my chest for a long time before using a magnet to secure it to the refrigerator. I had lost the master suite, the formal dining room, and the corridor adorned with family portraits. However, I was at peace. I wasn't only in the house this time either. The thing within belonged to me.